right, welcome everybody to this week's episode of the RevOps Podcast. I'm Jordan Henderson, and I'm joined today by Jonathan and Brandon, as usual. Go ahead and say hi, guys.
What's up, guys?
Cool. And this week, we are going to dive into what I think is actually going to be a really interesting topic, which is pricing, because it is a ubiquitous thing and something that marketing, sales, customer success, your entire team has a very vested interest in having it be done correctly. And it can honestly kind of make or break your business, I think. Like it is sort of
100%.
one of those very important things. And so I know every episode we've ever done, I think I've asked you guys for a definition. I'm not going to do that this week because it feels like this would be one you get right, and I don't like that. And so thanks, Bob Barker. I told you this topic 2 days ago. You had that joke ready since then, for sure. So pricing is, simply put, what you're asking people to pay for your product, right? The one sort of caveat to this entire conversation today that I wanted to note up front is that we have listeners in all sorts of industries. I have people messaging me from like consumer goods, industrial real estate, like all sorts of things, right? And so pricing is obviously a very different thing across all industries. It is ubiquitous across business as a generality, right? Like everybody's selling something at the end of the day. Right. And so, but today we're going to be focused on pricing in a software as a service business, pricing to a software as a service product, which presents unique challenges and opportunities. My hope is that a lot of what we discussed today will actually bear some relation or help with the topic outside of software, and maybe give people like creative ideas, things that like, hey, that I didn't know they did that in software. Maybe we should do that over here instead.
I love it.
Maybe some of that will be cool, but everything we're going to be talking about today, very software oriented, and we probably just lost like 20% of our listeners because they were like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, and they've moved on.
Bye.
But with that in mind, what I actually want to start with, just zero care for our listeners, for Jonathan.
If you don't want to listen, we don't want you here.
Guys, it's 6 minutes into the episodes. Let's pump the brake a little bit. We don't need to chase everybody off. This episode's listen curve is just dropping through the floor. Like 4 people make it all the way through, and 3 of them are your parents.
Hi, Mom.
Wow, we're really off the rails today. This is bad. All right, so pricing. First question, and I think this one is more fun. What is pricing to you? Like, how does it affect your role? How are you involved in it? And what are some common pricing models? And Brandon, product marketing is. Well, let's start with what is pricing to you in SaaS, because product marketing has always been very involved in pricing, and something that I think is very interesting and maybe people don't know.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so pricing, I feel like, is a smaller part of monetization, right? It's your monetization strategy, right? So like there's a lot of people think pricing is just your price points. A lot of people think pricing is what I learned in, microeconomics, and it's just how much people are willing to pay. But there's so much more that goes into that. And there's even actually a lot of psychology that can go into pricing that can affect how much you're able to charge and what people are willing to spend on your product. And I think it's a lot more strategic than a lot of people think. They think it's as easy as picking a price and putting it up on the website, or they might do like,
my competitors charge this. That's what we're going to charge.
Exactly. It's like
right.
at market pricing, right? That's exactly what that is. Or they do penetration pricing, where it's they see what everyone else is charging, then they undercut it by 5%. And I think that's a very common tactic that is a completely terrible idea, especially if you're a new entrant into the market, right? Like that's what everyone wants to do.
It's not based on your business, right? And we'll get into that in a little bit, I think. But it's not actually based on the structure and business plan that you have in place then.
Exactly. And the other part of that too is that the market doesn't know you, trust you, or like you yet, right? You don't have trust. Therefore, you can't undercut anyone else's price. Otherwise, you're just going to be some cheap person out there. Like
so before we jump into like
models,
the types of pricing models, sure, and that sort of stuff, the thing that I think is really fascinating, and maybe our listeners outside of tech won't know, because it doesn't really ping for somebody as like this is something that makes total sense. When you talk about it, I think it does, but product marketing oftentimes owns pricing in a lot of ways, right? Like you're actually the ones putting together pricing proposals. And it's not revenue operations doing it all the time. It's not sales doing it all the time. It's not finance necessarily, right? A lot of times it's product marketing working with those teams, but really leading that initiative. Why? Give me the arguments for why. Because it feels a bit like you'd be like, well, why doesn't the finance team do that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think they have the closest here on the market. A lot of the stuff that they are doing, like their job is to track your competitors, track where the market's going, track where the market's at. And I think pricing just naturally falls under them. I've been at companies where pricing falls under sales, which is, I think that's fine. That's probably the second most common place where it falls. Mm-hmm. And then, but like, look, as long as sales is involved, your product marketers are involved, your finance team probably should be involved too.
Some level of involvement from them, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the board's got to sign off on that, or there's a lot of people that are probably later stage that they get involved. It's just kind of more of a get a final sign off. But I think they're just closest to the market, and they have all the data. They're always looking at the analysis of that data, and I think they can make the most informed decisions. But a lot of people don't.
Right. But to me, it actually makes sense to have product marketing lead the initiative, because obviously the other people need to be voices in the room. But at the end of the day, product marketing, their job is to find your market fit. And they're identifying where that is. Like that's the sole purpose of your product marketing team. And so if the price is wrong, you're not going to be able to do that. And then everything downstream is going to fall apart as a result, which pricing is super important for those things. It's just an interesting thing, because I think if you look at other industries, it's the finance team, it's the sales team, and tech, I've seen it be the product marketing team 2 or 3 times now at different companies. And
there you go.
That's quite fascinating, and I often get asked, why is he doing this when that's happening?
It's so important to have right, because if you have a confusing pricing model, it's just a barrier to entry, and all of a sudden you're having a harder time selling your products.
Yeah, if there's one thing, by the way, that anybody takes away from this episode, it is don't overcomplicate your pricing. That would be like the one end-all, be-all, fast rule of doing pricing. Don't overcomplicate it. Like if I need a rubric to figure out your pricing, I'm not buying your product. Like, it's just not happening. Yeah. You have competitors, they have simpler pricing. Jonathan, tell me what your experience working with pricing. How do you get involved in that process in marketing operations?
Not a whole lot. They don't really clue us in the pricing.
I think that's totally fair. Actually, you have one of the unique roles that probably doesn't have a lot of guidance and insight into that particular topic.
No, I mean, I'd like the price to be right so that we can sell more. But.
Yeah, not to say you don't have a vested interest in the business being successful and therefore vested interest in the pricing being correct, but your involvement is probably more on the back end in terms of like data and stuff, pulling for the team on request to figure out what pricing to do, I would imagine.
But as an entrepreneur, I've had quite a few small businesses I've started up, and I will say from that experience, I've had to figure out pricing on all kinds of different things, from retail to just products in general, and it is difficult to come up with the right price, because if you price it too high, you get scared, okay, nobody's going to buy this because my competitors are a little cheaper, or if you price it too low, can I keep going at this price and remain fluid? And yeah, it's a whole thing.
Can we, Alec, our producer, this is a note for you. Can we please change Jonathan's bio to include entrepreneur, multiple startups? Because now that he's dropped, founder, 3x founder, 2 successful exits. Jonathan, entrepreneur.
Made about $20.
You are cut off from talking about pricing for the rest of the day if that's how much money you made.
My lawn mowing business.
Yeah, there you go.
But what are, so back to software in general, what are some, let's talk about common pricing models. I mean, I think the most common pricing model in software is just recurring subscription based on seats, right? So you get a price per seat. The more you have, it's recurring subscription. So it recurs at a certain price every month, every quarter, every year, whatever that looks like. And every time that happens, what that means is you are actually, the customer is deciding whether or not to renew. They're reevaluating your product and deciding whether or not they want to continue using it. What are some other sort of like what are some other pricing considerations or pricing models that you guys have worked within, or things that you'd caveat beyond just seat count?
Yeah, I see tier a lot coming out of the gate. So tiering based on, especially a company with multiple products, they'll offer kind of a entry level tier,
feature set based tiering sort of thing. Yeah, totally.
Which can be super confusing too. Like we're evaluating a tool right now and trying to just figure out what you get and what you don't get in those tiers as a whole thing. But I definitely get why they do it.
Totally. Yeah, and that one's super common. I think like people will add in things like storage volume will be included in there, or like as a different pricing tier. Freemium models, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about freemium. Which for everybody who's not familiar, freemium is the idea that you give people like a very low tier basic abilities where you get free access. You can do whatever you want. You can use it forever at the free level. But the moment you need more than 3 licenses or you need this feature, you have to pay a bunch of money. A lot of companies do this very successfully. They almost always get you to upgrade. We just upgraded with Rollup Helper for this exact reason, Jonathan. We made do on the freemium helper for a year easily. Yeah. And then we were like, oh, we need to upgrade. And now we've got like 10 more features and roll-ups than we had before, because we were just backing our way into using the free version.
Well, it feels like freemium is more of an acquisition strategy than it is a monetization strategy, especially these days with like product-led growth, right? It feels like it's the new hot thing. It's like what ABM was 5 years ago. Well, hey, it's the new hot thing. Everyone else is doing it. Let's try to do it. And their business isn't set up to actually be able to do that. Right? Like it's not a bottoms up business. Users don't have any buying power, and they completely screw themselves over because their business model is not set up for, product led growth or product led experiences or whatever you want to call it these days. Right?
Totally. And I think like freemium typically is it companies that don't have like an expensive sales team. They're not spending a lot of they have different overheads, right? So they don't have to have high tier prices to justify that anyway. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But so no matter what you do, all of these, by the way, are recurring. Everything we've talked about actually is some version of a recurring software. But at the end of the day, that does, like, you've decided, all right, great, I've got a recurring business model. It's going to be, we're going to shoot for annual contracts, et cetera, right? How do we actually determine what our price is? Like, how do I sit down and say this costs $89 a month per seat per month? Like, what am I doing? How am I figuring that out?
Okay.
Product marketing. Tell me. Like, what am I doing? this, I'm waiting for you.
Yeah. Well. The first thing that we really, and this is to a different model, which is value-based pricing, right? It's based on the value that you deliver. It's not based on let me compare myself to our competitors, because anytime we're comparing ourselves to competitors, I think that puts you selling on your heels. Right. So I want to be able to differentiate myself. I want to change the conversation entirely. I don't want you to evaluate the criteria that, the RFP template that my competitor gave you. I want my own RFP template. Right. And that's how I win deals. So it's really so value-based pricing, like the core foundation of value-based pricing is, what they call the value metric. Right. As your value metric goes up, they get more value from that product. So some organizations, some businesses, it's very straightforward, right? That the more money you save, right, that money is the value piece there, right? So for some financial businesses, like it's pretty easy to make that connection. For every dollar that you spend, it's we save you 10 cents on that dollar. But for software companies, which is what we're all usually operating in, it's like one step removed from that. So whether that is seat count, or whether that is API calls, or whether that is surveys sent, or whatever that value-based metric is, like you should spend the majority of your time getting that right. Because if you get that right and you don't pay attention to anything else, you're going to do pretty well still. Right, because expansion is baked into that, because stickiness of the product is baked into that. So if we spend our time finding that right value metric, then we're actually doing pretty well.
So how do you find that? I think is the tricky piece, because customer value-based pricing is awesome. I love value-based pricing. Right, in my opinion, it's the best version of software pricing.
100%,
I know there's competitor-based pricing. There's all sorts of things, right? I think there's weaknesses and strengths in all of them. I think customer value-based one is the strongest right now, and is becoming more ubiquitous, to be honest.
Yep.
But I think what people do wrong is how do you actually, like, what are the data points that you look at to determine how much value this is providing for my customer? Am I having my sales team like quantify it when they're closing deals? Am I which maybe I don't have that yet because I don't have pricing.
Sure.
Am I calling up customers and asking them? Am I running models on the back end and inputting data into that based on what I estimate the value is going to be to see what that kicks out in return in dollars? Because essentially I need to figure out how much money I'm either saving or helping them make, right? And so how do you do it? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so finding your value metric, we'll spend a few minutes on that maybe. Like I
do it. I want to hear. I think this is the thing that people don't know about. Like how do you do that?
Right. All right. So to find your value metric, like you probably have an idea of maybe 10 different metrics, whether that's seat count, calls made, emails sent, whatever that is. And then you can actually start going out and surveying people. So you could do some sort of like, max diff survey where it's basically like it's 2 questions. Here's this whole list of features. What's the most important to you and what's the least important to you? And you go out, you launch that, people will tell you. So you have this curve where you have this, graph where it's like, a lot of value on one side, and then you'll have a lot of features or other metrics that are like no value on the other side, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good way to actually ask customers what those things are that they value the most.
So really, it's about man on the streeting it a little bit, right? Like
Totally.
you are actually asking them the questions, like which of these features is valuable to you, and how much value are you getting from it?
Exactly.
Which is a good note if you're somebody who buys tech, because you should always say, I'm getting like no value from this. Maybe they'll lower their pricing. None of them are valuable, and they're all worth $4.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's really interesting though, and I maybe this is wrong, but my assumption is sort of if you're changing pricing, if you have some version of pricing, but you're revisiting it because you've released new features or new products or things like that, you're probably evaluating existing customers and some potential customers.
Yep.
And if you're just making pricing for the first time, you've probably asked a whole bunch of people to take a look at your potential product and give you feedback anyways, see if it's something that would be valuable to them, just to get feedback and be product driven. Ask those same people, I guess, how much value would you get out of this? Not just is this valuable, but how valuable is it to you? And start to quantify it that way. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have no problem actually going out and like going to a Qualtrics and saying, here's the type of people that I want to survey. Here's the title. Here's the seniority. Now I'm going to pay for
that's interesting.
You can pay for these. Yeah, 100%. I think that's very valid, and that's a good way if you don't have a lot of contacts, if you are pretty new,
or if you don't know how to do it because you haven't done it before.
Totally. Yeah, right. Totally. Yeah, and in that case, if you're using a Qualtrics, then have them build the survey too. Don't think you can try to build that survey yourself.
We will. We will. So everybody go use Qualtrics. Use code Jordan at checkout. I'm just kidding.
20% off.
Get 20% off.
We have no deals with Qualtrics. I wish we did, but we do not.
Awesome.
Use SurveyMonkey. I don't care. Use
whatever. But use Qualtrics.
Use Qualtrics.
It's good. It's a good product. Let's be honest. It's a good product. All right, Jonathan, anything you want to add to considerations when determining value? I think that was really helpful, by the way. Even for me, that was something that you like just talking through that. And outsourcing it's super valuable and important. Jonathan, anything you want to add to that sort of conversation, that part of this?
Yeah, I think creating demand. I think making sure that you're competitive. You're in a place where people will want to pay that to get it, so they have to understand what they're getting out of it. So I think you have to really understand that facet. You also have to really make sure that your pricing is good for the business, that you're going to be able to continue to grow, make more money as a business, hire more people to support that product, be able to pay for the underlying overhead that maybe the product relies on, whether it's hosting or things like that. So there's a lot of things you got to factor into it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think there's tons of things when I'm looking at value. Like you of course need to balance that with other considerations, right? Like business decisions and like marketplace, customer, competitor stuff. Like all that, while it shouldn't determine your pricing, I think still has to be considered. Like things that I would consider is that your sales model has to match your pricing. So once you've determined your value and you've figured all these things out, and let's be honest, if they tell you your value is $19 a month per user, right? Like it's some pretty low dollar amount, and you have a really expensive sales team and a really expensive marketing team, that's not going to line up. Like you need your pricing to line up in a way to offset the costs of your sales teams and your marketing teams and your entire business model. If you have a high CAC and an expensive sales team, you need higher pricing and to justify it, to create a higher LTV. So you can create a higher LTV, which means your product must provide enough value to support the price. So then you have to go back and work on your product. And that's where I think when we circle all the way back to why everybody says they are now product-led, or product growth-led companies. Like, well, you always have been, right? You always had to be, right? Like, yeah, because at the end of the day, I can't price to just support my two teams if I have a product that doesn't support that value. Like that's the end of the day most important thing. Yeah. So let's say this. So you've released a whole bunch of new features, new products. You've decided to revisit your pricing. You've come up with your customer value. It matches perfectly over to the LTV that you need to create to support your financial model, your sales team, your marketing team. You're super happy with it. So you've got your pricing packages in place. What other things would you recommend doing, like as a part of your pricing, to actually create future? To benefit the company in the future? And the sort of low-hanging fruit one that I would use as an example is tiering to create upsell opportunities, right? Like I would always create my pricing in a way that sets the company up to have upsell growth organically. So I'm not having to pursue upsells as much. That money is coming in. Now, obviously, I want to close more at the start if I can, like entry level, but organic upsells are super powerful and a huge piece of your business. So I would always set up my pricing in order to sort of tailor towards additional upsells. Are there other things that you would think about when setting that up?
I'd say barrier to entry as far as just even making payments. Some people just make it really difficult to get that contract across the finish line. So having the right mechanisms in place so that the contracts can go back and forth fluidly, people are approving it, and that's a big one. I've seen a lot of stuff stop just because of how painful that process was of getting that payment.
That's fair. And as it pertains to pricing, sort of like if your entry is $100,000 for all customers, that's a pretty high barrier for a lot of businesses to come in. But if you have a lower entry point with high growth opportunities, it might result in more customers. By the way, it might not. Cheap isn't always mean better. That's also very, very true. Cheap often doesn't result in more customers, but it's definitely a thing I would keep in consideration. But probably, in my mind at least, like somewhere down the list, I think. Like it's important, but maybe not. If that's a problem, then I'm not value selling enough. You know what I mean? Like if we're having a hard time getting it through because of pricing, then I either am not providing enough value for it, or I'm not selling the value well enough, or I'm not marketing the value well enough. Like something is running amok there that's preventing us from getting in there otherwise, if I know my pricing is right. Yeah.
Well, go back to if we know our pricing is right real quick. So I think that there are some surveys that you can do for that as well, like price sensitivity surveys.
You're just all over the surveys today.
I want to be as data driven as possible.
I love this. All right, so but tell us, what's the pricing sensitivity survey? Tell me about this. I love this.
Yeah. Okay. So probably the most well known one out there is Van Westendorp survey, and I know companies like Profitwell have their own version of the Van Westendorp, but it's basically asks you a few questions. I mean, the Van Westendorp is 2 questions, but there are others out there that are 4 questions, and you're just basically asking people like what is the most they're willing to pay, what's the least they're willing to pay. Some other versions of that are what's the most you're willing to pay, or what at what price point does it now sound like a cheap product, right? So there are a lot of different versions of these price sensitivity surveys, but then you end up with a graph, and then you have kind of this sweet spot in the middle, and then you have to figure out from there where in that sweet spot do we want to land. But it's really going to narrow your band of pricing down. And I always want to use data to back up my pricing. So that's one. There's also what's called a Gabor, or I've heard it pronounced Gabor, depending on what the guy's actual nationality. Gabor Granger survey. Yeah, and there's a few things wrong with this too. But you have 10 people, and you say the price is this. And then you ask them, are you willing to pay? All 10 raise their hand. All right.
And you ask 10 more and 10 more, and at what point do they fall off?
Right, yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And then you can
like
actually...
$5 more, $5 more, $5 more. Where do you start to waterfall?
That's exactly it. Yep.
I love that. That's brilliant and simple. Everybody go do that.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. It's like people have declared preferences. They say, yeah, sure, I would pay that. And then you're like, okay, let's pay it now. And they're like, yeah, well, you know what? Maybe later. Right. So their declared preferences versus their actual revealed, like what they actually would pay for. I really do like that, the Gabor Granger survey.
Well, it obviously exists in a vacuum, right?
Exactly.
Because they're not actually paying you that money. It's not their business actually absorbing those costs. And so they're like, well, yeah, it's that valuable. Until
totally.
Until they actually have to pay it. So... And it's impossible to ask them. It's like playing poker with pennies.
Yeah,
exactly. You go all in a whole lot easier, right? Than if you're playing with thousands of dollars.
Yep. Well, the next part of that is then go create a pricing page and start sending people that actual page. So
I love that. By the way, I love transparent pricing pages. I think that's like the greatest shift that's happening in the market right now is just, I can go to your website and find pricing. Because by the way, as a sales, if you're a salesperson and somebody sees the pricing online and then still signs up for a demo request, that pricing is not going to be an objection.
Right.
That is cut out of the equation, right? Like they know it. They know what it is before they've come in. So obviously they're still very, very interested in what you can provide them. And your job then is to sell that value.
Exactly. The worst thing is coming into a deal and you assume it's like around a certain price, and then you start talking and it's like astronomically higher than you would have ever expected.
Yeah, totally.
That sticker shock will just
totally
burn
happens. You. And so one thing, when we publish this episode, I want to, Brandon, let's make sure we include 2 links to some of these resources you're talking about, because I think those are really interesting for people, and we should have some offline conversations internally probably about that. But there's one other thing that I hate in pricing, by the way, that happens, and I think it's worth talking about for a brief moment. Last minute services costs. How do you guys feel about at the finish line, oh, by the way, implementation costs this much, ongoing support costs this much, here's an extra $15,000 in contract cost?
That is the worst.
I see just awkward smiles.
It's just like sneaking price in at the last minute, and it's got to be up front. You've got to put that stuff up front.
Totally. I mean, and also, you've got to decide whether or not your product even warrants it.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Like if your product, it's sort of a catch-22, but if your product has great UI and it's very user-friendly and it does something really powerful and easy, it's going to be really hard for you to charge for support and service, right? Like they don't need your support and service. You've built a tool that's self-serve. And therefore, like, they don't want to pay for that. And so when you ask them to, they're going to be more upset. They're paying you for nothing. Totally. At the end of the day, like, just roll it into your seat price.
Exactly.
Why keep it in that, like, the ongoing support charges? Like, just put it in your seat price if they don't need it. Well, if it's valuable enough, people are paying it, then you're undercharging per seat.
Well, I'll tell you, like, VCs like to see that extra.
I know. I know.
I remember the first.
It's shifting away, though.
It is.
It is shifting away.
I will agree. That is. But I remember the first time. I mean, this is a long time ago. But I was talking to someone.
Well, we need 10% of your revenue to come from services.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to someone at like one of the early Marketo guys, head of sales at Marketo, and he was like, "Yeah, we got 20% of our revenue came from service," and he was bragging about that. And the first thing that struck me was like, do you really need that much services for people?
Yeah.
But for Marketo, yeah, probably.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, they can do. Yeah, but like the other piece of that though is it's not recurring revenue. As somebody in revenue operations who's trying to grow our business from a recurring revenue standpoint, because recurring revenue is infinitely more valuable than one-off revenue. Yeah, it really, really is. And so that's why if every deal is paying you $5,000 for implementation at the onset, and you're charging $5,000 for the software, charge $8,000 for the software and don't charge for implementation.
Yeah, exactly.
You will increase your lifetime value of your customer because $8,000 is recurring. You get 2 years. That's $6,000 instead of $5,000 for that amount of money, right? Mm-hmm. And so all you have to do is renew them once, and there you go. You've made an extra $1,000. If you renew them twice, you've made an extra $4,000, right? Like, if you're doing that successfully every single time and nobody's objecting to it, that's fine. Recurring revenue is God in software. It really is. Totally. So exactly. That would be my nudge. Despite what some VC might tell you, and despite some VC would probably send me a scolding email for this conversation. but I hate the idea of like, we need to get 20% from services.
No way.
Yeah. It's crazy. And the whole, you'll always have to give the argument of like, well, we're just investing in making sure you're successful when you're trying to sell them services. Like, no, you're not. Like, come on, you're just trying to make some money. If you're that invested, you'll do it for free. Is the answer. All right, so I'm gonna sort of succinctly try to summarize the multitude of things we just went through, unless you guys have any other final thoughts.
I do have a few more thoughts.
All right, a few more, multiple more. I knew this was going to be a Brandon Redlinger heavy day.
I know. It's like, man, I have so much to talk about in this episode.
That's why I was really excited about this topic, actually, for what it's worth. Like, I think this is such an interesting topic because it's so cross-functional, and a lot of people haven't been exposed to doing it before. So
totally.
Final thoughts. Okay, hit them with.
So packaging. So there's pricing, but then there's actual packaging. I think if you get packaging proper or right, it could have exponential returns on your business as well.
Let's tell people what you mean by that.
Right. So if I have a few different products, bundle them together. And then, honestly, it could even be as far as what I actually name them. What are add-ons to that?
Wildly important.
Totally,
what you 100%. Name packages. Wildly important.
Yeah, and then so there's. Let's start with. I'm a big fan of profit wells. Like I think they call it the value matrix, where it's on one axis you have the value that someone gets, and then you have willingness to pay on the Y. And then on the high value, low willingness to pay, that's your core product, right? That's like email marketing, marketing automation saying, we do landing pages, we do email tracking, we do reporting. Like that is the core product. And then you have high value, high willingness to pay. Those are your differentiators. Then you have lower value and high willingness to pay. Those are your add-ons. And then you have the bottom left, low value, low willingness to pay. That's just the trash products.
That's just people you're never going to sell people to. Like,
that's just trash right there.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, exactly. Just throw them away and ignore them.
Exactly. So I think that's how you can think about the different features in your product. And then I think there's actually testing your different packaging. So I think one of the good, probably more popular ways to test packaging is like a conjoint analysis. And that's basically a bunch of different variations of your packaging and asking people, here's one, here's another, what do you prefer? And then you swap out one little detail. Here's one, here's another, what do you prefer? Swap out another detail. Here's one, here's another, which one do you prefer? And I have no problem with paying to get more data and to get more respondents to these surveys because it gives you great insight into what the actual proper packaging and bundles should actually be. Because I think, if you get that right, that's another value unlock for your company.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just to sort of like summarize that, one of the key things you're mentioning is identify the value per feature, so that when you go into packaging, if you have something that's in the high value but low willingness to pay, that's probably in your base pricing, because you want to drive value there, right? That's your base package. And if you have something that's high value, high willingness to pay, that's in your enterprise tier, because people are willing to pay a whole bunch of money, right? Like, you're using that to bucket like how much I'm going to ask them to pay for these things.
Exactly. Or you could put it like depending on your pricing strategy. All right. So, geez, this is a whole nother.
We're gonna have to do a whole other episode on this. No. I mean, I think this is a two-parter. I think we've decided it's a two-parter for sure.
Yeah, maybe it's definitely two-parter. But like, why are you packaging the way you're packaging? Is it to maximize margin? Is it to maximize profit? Is it to take the most market share? Is it to get the most users? It actually starts with that.
Is it to increase your LTV? Is it to create organic upsells?
Competitive parity.
There's so many competitive parity. Yep. There's so many reasons to consider here.
Like it starts there. You make that decision, and then you figure out how you actually price, how you actually maximize that. So
I like that.
We actually should have started there.
We should. Well. This is a note for everybody. Start there.
Start there.
Like, why are you packaging the way you're packaging, and then back everything into that how you would do it, and then figure out the value and create your pricing.
Right. Exactly.
And honestly, that's where the process we're working on. It's sort of like when John Miller walked us through how he would roll out an ABM plan with accounts. It's sort of working backwards from what you might think it would be.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
It totally works.
So I love that. I think probably the two best tips that I have is, one, know that why are you trying to price the way you're pricing? Like, what's the objective? And then two, get your value metric right. And I think if you do those two things, like, I think you'll do pretty well.
Yeah. Those things are very hard to do. So if you do those two things well, you'll do very well. Jonathan, any last thoughts before I sort of take us on home to the final topics?
I can't think of any last thoughts. I think you guys covered it. This is my least knowledgeable subject.
I like that you own that, though. Like, I've seen you sitting here kind of like wide-eyed, like nodding, like, oh, that's really smart. Like, I like that. You're just, we're here to learn too. This is sort of part of it, right? Like, I learn from you guys every week, and you'll never hear me say that again.
I do like the psychological aspects of pricing. So, like making it 99 cents instead of the dollar, and just
charm pricing.
It,
yeah, exactly.
Like how you lay it out on a page will kind of make you realize one's a little bit of a better value than the other. Stuff like that. It's really cool. Yeah, but I'm more of a marketer on that side. I don't have a lot of in-depth pricing.
Right. So if I'm gonna try to summarize up a whole bunch of our takeaways. There's a lot here, by the way. This is our meatiest topic.
It might be.
Yeah. So some high-level takeaways. Number one, don't overcomplicate pricing. If you have too complicated pricing, it won't work out. Two, value-based pricing, it's the real deal. Like, at the end of the day, I think we all agree that it's awesome. Go with value-based pricing. Figure out how to do that appropriately. A third one, customers don't care about your costs, to be honest. Like, that, it goes back to value-based pricing. If you're like, what, it costs us this much money, they don't care. That doesn't justify value to customers. They don't care how much your data storage costs are. Like, why would they? They care about how much value they're getting out of your product. They do care, though, about your competitors' prices, because if they can get similar value from somebody that's charging them half as much, that's a problem for you. Mm-hmm. Always consider whether your product support warrants services and support costs. Yeah. It probably doesn't, is my conclusion for most products. Packaging is equally important to pricing and more important to start there. Cheap doesn't always result in more customers. And this is the final one, which is, I think, the most important thing, and we haven't said it out loud. Surveys and data are incredibly important in pricing. Take your time, survey everybody, ask all the right questions, contract somebody like a Qualtrics, boom, Qualtrics, 7 drop. Contract somebody like them and get it right, because changing pricing is hard, and it's also fundamental to making your business successful.
And I'll also point people to Price Intelligently or Profit Well or whatever they go by these days. I'm a big fan of their services as well.
Totally. Did that cover it all? That's like 9 takeaways of things to do. So
and next time we'll hit on charm pricing and decoy pricing and
discount we're gonna not do pricing for like 3 more months because I sat in silence way too much this episode. I didn't like it.
I love this episode. I didn't have to listen to Jordan.
Brandon had a field day.
All right. So with that in mind, I want to segue us into our final topic, our final thing. As usual, it is time for This Week on LinkedIn. I'm loving this, by the way, everybody who listens to the podcast. I'm getting a lot more questions on LinkedIn. Please continue to submit them to me. I think that's like the greatest thing. This is my favorite segment by far, for what it's worth, because it sort of changes every week. It's new, it's fun, and it's exciting. And also the audience gets to, kind of participate a little bit. And maybe we'll figure out ways in the future for them to participate more, like drop in asking the question, which would be pretty sweet, right?
Hell yeah.
Hint, audience. So somebody was listening to our podcast and actually asked a question that is wildly unrelated and probably something a lot of people ask. How do we all work together or not work together? And what is our overlap between the 3 of us, which we've never talked about? I was like, oh, that's a really good question. We probably should have covered that, in the first episode. But I mean, the short answer is I try not to.
But I try to stay away from Jordan as much as possible.
But yeah, it's a great question, and I'm gonna take a first crack at answering it. But I work with Jonathan super closely. We probably work on the same projects 3 to 4 hours a day. We meet every single day for 15 minutes in the morning to sort of plan on our days, talk about what my team, sales ops and CS and that stuff is working on with marketing operations, and make sure that we're aligning all those things so that any of those teams are doing is not overstepping or breaking something for the other teams. We literally meet daily to make sure that that's true. And I think Jonathan and I usually are messaging each other from 10 a.m. when Jonathan wakes up to 7 p.m. About things like that. So work super close together. And then Brandon and I aren't to that degree spending 6 hours a day together, but we probably talk pretty much daily about different things and sort of stay lockstep on a lot of it. We have probably a little less overlap, but we're in a more of the leadership meetings and doing some of those things and making directional business decisions and implementing a lot of different things, whether it be from demand gen, product marketing, content marketing, all sorts of stuff, rolling it over to the sales teams. In a lot of ways, I feel like you're doing a lot of stuff on the marketing side, and I'm kind of a lightning rod for sales and CS for you a little bit sometimes.
Well said. Well, actually, one question that I got on LinkedIn is kind of related to what we're talking about already. One person asked me, why do you have RevOps and marketing ops separate? So, and how does that work? So, Jonathan, do you want to jump in on that one?
That's a good question.
It is a very good question. I mean, it could go either way. I think, especially marketing ops, it's typically a support role for the marketing team. So, first and foremost, I'm here to support marketing if I'm in the marketing department. Whereas I think there could be some different companies might have different viewpoints on it. But if I'm not reporting up through marketing, if I'm reporting up through ops, some companies might have an issue with that because a lot of companies are siloed off. So if you're reporting up through a different structure, you might not support marketing as well. So I think that's one argument for reporting up through marketing ops.
Those companies are wrong, and it can't go both ways. I'm totally disagreeing with that, because we also have a sales ops person, right? So we have sales ops, mark ops, and revenue operations. I think it is incredibly important to have those functions be able to focus solely on supporting a team that's going to need a lot of support, frankly. Not to say that Jonathan doesn't jump over and help with sales or CS from time to time, or Matt, who does sales ops, doesn't jump over and help with marketing from time to time. But it is very important for them to have essentially a bit of blinders on and supporting that team, while also having somebody whose job it is to make sure that those teams are aligned, so that I can make sure that Matt and Jonathan are aligned on everything they do. And they're incredibly aligned. I think we used to live in a world where marketing operations, sales operations, customer success operations all existed within their own silo and never communicated. RevOps is actually solving that problem at the end of the day. So yeah, the function is going to, I think in the best version of it, I think those functions continue to exist, and somebody is in charge of making sure those functions are aligned. That's what we're doing here. And anybody who tells me ladder can shoot me an email or LinkedIn and argue with me. I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And I'm passionate about this because, well, it's my job. Yeah. So if I lose that argument, I lose my job. So, but it is a great question. Anything you guys want to add in terms of like how we work together? Or to that, for what it's worth? Like,
I think the other thing that we didn't quite touch on is how Jonathan and I work together.
Yeah, how do you and Jonathan work together? I don't even know that.
Well, I mean, Jonathan and I are in a lot of meetings together, both like marketing strategy, but also technically executing a lot of things. So I mean, I talk with him quite frequently these days. So, I mean, probably... I don't know. Maybe not as much as you and him talk. Yeah, you and him probably talk.
We talk all day, every day. Yeah, you have no idea. if there's like how many messages you send per person, like marketing ops, sales ops, rev ops are like easily the three of us the top.
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
list.
that's probably true. That's probably true.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then obviously Alec, our producer, he's our producer. That's how we work with him. But he also does a bunch of our content strategy and pushes things on our social media selling approach, which you guys listen to the social selling episode. He talks a lot in that one. But we all work super closely with Alec on a bunch of that stuff. He produces and pushes our stuff for editing and pulls video clips for our socials and does all sorts of basically managing what is the equivalent of 3 children making a podcast. So,
we wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah,
that is very true. It is very true. Cool. Super helpful. Any other last thoughts, guys?
No, is this the longest episode we've done? I feel like this is the longest episode we've done so far.
It really drug on. It might. We'll see how many. Well, we're gonna have to do some surveys. Hit up Qualtrics and survey how valuable was this content to them today.
How many people are still listening right now?
Yeah. If you're still listening to this and you email Brandon, he will take a meeting with you to see your product. Just reference code Brandon 098 and. You're legitimately going to get emails for that. Alex said we work for him, by the way. All right. With that in mind, thanks, guys. I think this was an awesome episode, and we will see everybody next week.
See you next week.
Adios.